Welcome to this explainer. We are jumping straight into the deep end today to objectively map out some incredibly intricate and frankly, highly controversial claims found across a couple of fascinating esoteric texts. We're going to be unpacking concepts that range from universal life forces and alleged ancient atomic wars all the way to occult cosmic struggles. Whether you look at these texts as forgotten fragments of history or just elaborate modern mythologies, our goal today is to neutrally break down exactly what they're actually claiming.
Here's a quick roadmap so we can navigate these wild claims without getting totally lost in the weeds. We're going to hit 5 main areas. First, the mystery of Vril. Second, ancient flying machines. Third, ancient atomic war claims. Fourth, Nazi occultism and UFOs. And finally, the esoteric cosmic struggle.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the mystery of Vril, the so-called universal force.
You've probably heard of terms like chi, prana, or reiki, right? Well, according to the source material, this mysterious energy is recognized worldwide. But in Western esoteric traditions, especially those popping up in the 19th and 20th centuries, it's often referred to as Vril. The texts describe it as this potent, harnessable ether stream. Essentially, it's an active principle that forms a part of every living thing, a life force that, theoretically, can actually be transformed into literal, physical power.
And you can see how historical figures completely elevated this from a purely spiritual meditative concept into a potentially world-altering physical weapon. Take the 19th century writer and Freemason Albert Pike, for example. His writings really illustrate this shift toward physical mastery. The esoteric texts assert that controlling this specific force is the ultimate key to unlocking advanced technology.
Moving right along to Section 2, ancient flying machines, or the Vimanas. The texts lean heavily on ancient Hindu epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which vividly describe Vimanas. These are depicted as mythical, self-moving aerial cars or flying palaces. And the author highlights that these descriptions go way beyond simple wooden chariots. They detail crafts capable of hitting incredible high speeds and, crucially, having the ability to drop devastating explosives from high altitudes. Which leads us directly into one of the most startling claims in Section 3, ancient atomic war claims and their echoes of destruction.
The source material highlights a pretty eerie connection here, using J. Robert Oppenheimer. The father of the atomic bomb was famously heavily influenced by Vedic philosophy. And right after witnessing the very first nuclear explosion at the Trinity test site, he quoted the Bhagavad Gita. The text suggests that Oppenheimer recognized some terrifying parallels between the modern nuclear detonations he just helped create and the incredibly destructive weapons described in those ancient scriptures.
And these esoteric sources don't just stop at ancient poetry. They draw literal parallels to modern atomic devastation. The text points out that ancient Vedic literature describes weapons capable of destroying the Earth in an instant, producing expanding round circles like giant parasols, causing hair and nails to fall out, and burning bodies beyond recognition. To the author, this isn't some poetic metaphor. They argue it's a literal, historical description of radiation sickness and atomic blasts.
To physically back up these ancient texts, the author points to geological anomalies, specifically Libyan desert glass. This is a natural silica glass found scattered across the Sahara Desert, and it requires absolute extreme heat to form. Fun fact, a piece of this exact glass was even found carved into a scarab in King Tutankhamun's pendant. Testing puts this glass at roughly 28 million years old.
So mainstream science usually points to a meteorite impact or a massive atmospheric airburst to explain the immense heat needed to fuse that sand into glass, even though no specific impact crater has ever been found. But the alternative theory presented by the author? Echoing writers like Zecharia Sitchin, it attempts to insert ancient high-tech warfare right into those gaps in mainstream geology, arguing that this glass is the literal radioactive fallout of an ancient terrestrial atomic war.
All right, jumping forward to the 20th century, we hit Section 4, Nazi occultism and UFOs, and the modern co-optation of this ancient tech.
The timeline lays out a super bizarre and highly controversial timeline here. It claims that in pre-World War II Germany, secret groups like the Vril Society and the Thule Society were actively trying to reawaken that ancient Vril force we talked about earlier. And supposedly they succeeded way beyond conventional history. The timeline claims they went from hybrid anti-gravity craft in the 1920s to a revolutionary electromagnetic engine in 1939. And get this, even constructing massive cigar-shaped space stations by the early 1940s.
The author points to alleged blueprints in some heavily disputed grainy photos to argue that Vril-powered flying discs were completely real. According to the text, these crafts, sometimes called Hanabu, utilized rotating electromagnetic fields that manipulated gravity. This supposedly allowed the Nazi elite to totally bypass the need for scarce, conventional fossil fuels. Now, this narrative leans heavily on the very real shock of what the Allies actually discovered at the end of the war. They found historically verified, highly advanced tech like the Horton flying wings, which look strikingly similar to modern stealth bombers. The author uses this to lend a veneer of credence to their French claims. Basically, the argument is, if they had these vast, advanced underground factories, who's to say they weren't successfully hiding even deeper secrets about free energy and anti-gravity?
Which brings us to our final act. Section 5, the esoteric cosmic struggle.
So according to these esoteric texts, we really have to ask, what is the end game here? If there are hidden forces manipulating ancient energies and hiding anti-gravity technologies, what are they actually trying to achieve? Well, our second source outlines a very specific and honestly very dark worldview. Strictly from its own fringe perspective, the text argues that Western civilization is fundamentally an entropic force, a kingdom of pure matter and violent aggression. It even claims that concepts like pacifism and modern virtues are actually just masks for a vampiric energy it calls the demiurge. The stated end goal of these hidden power structures? To create a dark golden age, a perfectly controlled, heavily technologized slave society ruled by untouchable masters, which will ultimately expand outward to superintend a dystopian galactic federation.
And the wildest part? The author claims this totalitarian future isn't even a secret. They say it is openly broadcasted to the public as predictive programming in popular science fiction media. They point straight at beloved franchises like Star Trek, arguing that it's not some hopeful vision of human exploration at all, but rather deliberate psychological conditioning to prep the masses for a highly structured, tech-dominated universal order.
As we wrap up this explainer, we want to leave you with this final thought. We've just mapped out a sweeping, wild narrative connecting ancient life forces, Vedic flying machines, prehistoric atomic blasts, Nazi occultism, and a literal cosmic war against a sci-fi dystopia. So what do you make of all this? Do these intricate, labyrinthine narratives actually point to hidden truths completely suppressed by mainstream history, or do they represent humanity's enduring, perhaps even dangerous desire to find hidden, magical order and epic struggles of light versus dark just to explain our chaotic modern world? It's an absolutely fascinating mythos, and I really hope this breakdown helped you navigate the depths of these alternative claims.